Good morning, everyone. I will try to obviously take up the whole hour because I don't know about you, but I'm starting to get a bit hungry. If you want to follow on screen or in your binders, the slides are there as well. There's actually 4 different segments I'm going to cover, 2 before lunch and 2 after lunch. And we're going to start at the higher levels of looking at institutional governance concepts in public procurement in the first module in the morning. And then I'm going to go one level more detail into concepts, a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a checklist, into concepts that help you govern major procurement projects. Many of those concepts will apply to any procurement project, but they're that much more pronounced when we're talking about larger procurement projects where the risks from many different contexts are more magnified. At any time during these discussions, feel free to get up, ask questions as we proceed. So let's turn to the institutional strategies. What are some of the concepts at the institutional level that we want to look at to help build winning conditions in our procurement practices? You'll recall that yesterday I alluded to a number of public purchasing controversies that arose within the Canadian context in the last few years. One was known as the sponsorship scandal, in which the federal government established a program to give contracts out to promote government activities in the province of Quebec. What became uncovered during that project by the Auditor General's office in Canada was that certain contracts were being awarded outside of the norms of the typical procurement process. And in fact, some of those contracts were being awarded to firms that had political connections to the governing party. The Prime Minister at the time ordered a public inquiry. As the revelations started coming out from that inquiry, an election was held. That government lost power. First, it was reduced to minority status. The second report came out. It lost government in its entirety. A new minority government was elected. It was a big scandal. And what it did was that it brought the once obscure topic of public procurement into the national spotlight. Public procurement went front page, prime time, and mainstream. What was occurring concurrently to that in the city of Toronto was another purchasing scandal that prompted another public inquiry. Toronto Computer Leasing Inquiry. Runaway computer contract. At the heart of that were details that were negotiated in through lobbying activities that created inflated interest rates for the leasing of contracts. And those contracts weren't managed properly. So the prices started ballooning upwards, upwards, upwards. Eventually, again, oversight came in, an inquiry was held, and what I can share with you now is the Canadian experience of how that undermined public confidence in public purchasing and some of the measures that can be taken into account, learning from those experiences to instill winning conditions in the way that we procure in the public sector. This is an excerpt that I had in the slide yesterday on the access issues. The idea that it's excerpted from a cover story I did for a magazine at the time, where I talked about the fact that once the scandal hits, it doesn't matter how quickly you were working through your documents, and we work in these very rapid procurement cycles and everything's happening very quickly, but all of a sudden that scandal hits and everything slows down, slow motion, and that spectacle, the public spectacle of second guessing and finger pointing begins. And you find yourself as a purchasing professional on the front line of that. I refer to it as being, at times, feeling like you're a participant in one of those TV reality shows, and you're the open target on that shooting range. It's not a fun place to be. That's where we are. We're in the spotlight of that public scrutiny when we do public procurement, when the politicization of the procurement process becomes pronounced. What I think had occurred in the Canadian context, at least, is that purchasing professionals got a bad rap because these incidents, while significant, were isolated. Yet the way that they were portrayed within the media created a misimpression amongst the public. See, because when you do the deal and it goes well, and things run smoothly, and you serve the public interest properly, they never report about that. That never makes the papers, does it? What you hear about are the problems, and that creates a distortion. Yet what our challenge is in public procurement is to bolster public confidence in the way we do what we do. And that's what I want to touch upon, some of these measures for bolstering and reinforcing public confidence in our system in the way in which we do our procurement. These steps, this checklist that I'm going to walk through here, include enhanced external oversight, the need for public institutions to have that type of external oversight as the Auditor General's oversight that eventually discovered the abuses of the sponsorship program and enabled corrective measures to eventually be brought to bear. They also require building a culture of ethics and accountability. Many of the speakers have spoken on the subject of corruption and how the law in and of itself cannot be the ultimate solution, no matter how strong the law is created to try to battle these things. What we need is to instill a culture of ethics and accountability within our institutions. That's go beyond the letter of the law to the fabric of the institution itself. That also requires the establishment of clear roles and responsibilities. Where there's ambiguity with respect to roles and accountabilities, that is where improper practices can flourish. We need proactive leadership in this regard. These institutional strategies don't get built by accident, and they don't happen without proper, strong leadership to bring them about. We need to achieve two things, and this is a tricky balance to achieve. We need to achieve common centralized rules and practices to build efficiencies, so as not to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time we need to allow and enable and empower innovation within the organization. And that's a delicate balancing act, achieving these final 2 points. Justice Gomery, when he released the first part of his report for the sponsorship inquiry, quoted someone who wrote to him, who emailed him and asked, where were the parliamentarians when the sponsorship program was going on? It was a fair question, Justice Gomery said, one that identified a key failure in the management of the sponsorship program. The failure of Parliament to fulfill its traditional and historic role as watchdog of spending by the executive branch of government. And one of the key recommendations that came out of Gomery was the need to have the proper external oversight over the operations of government institutions. We elect officials, yet in this instance, the Canadian Parliament did not have the tools at its disposal to oversee the spending practices of the particular department whose purchasing practices have become politicized. So what we need to achieve is the right balance that includes external oversight mechanisms that provide checks and balances to guard against inefficiencies and abuses. And part of that also includes clear rules aimed at protecting the integrity of the procurement process by addressing issues like conflict of interest, unfair advantage, and the lobbying of public officials to influence contract awards. And when we're talking about ethics and accountability, what we're talking about here is, I draw a parallel between the independence of the judiciary, and I draw a parallel to the way in which procurement decisions ought to be made with the same level of independence on the merits. Not based on some parallel process, based on backdoor discussions, but based on the merits of the transparent criteria upon which the contract was intended to be awarded. And that requires building in safeguards to establish the winning conditions to promote this culture of ethics, so that these awards are being done above board based on valid considerations. Justice Bellamy, in her report for the Toronto Computer Leasing Inquiry, noted that it is widely recognized that public officials have a greater responsibility to uphold ethical standards to protect the public interest. And universally, she notes that experts offer the view that ethics-related values and principles are the essential foundation of public sector procurement in leading jurisdictions. Her mandate included an analysis of public spending at the municipal level across North America, Canada, and the US, and she drew certain conclusions out of that, and some of which I will highlight for you here today.